Hello and welcome to the Drone Network, the only podcast in the air and on the airwaves. I'm your host, Bryce Bladon, and on this show, we document the tech, economics, and people piloting the world's largest standardized drone imagery network. Each episode, we explore how drones are reshaping industries, creating new economic opportunities, and literally changing how we see the world. On today's episode, we ask a drone community of over 10,000 pilots to answer your 10 biggest questions about drones. What models do pilots recommend? How will drones change in the next 5 years? Today's guest, the LayerDrone community as a whole. Every week for the past 10 weeks, I've posed these questions to the community in Discord, and today, I'm sharing their answers and the data that supports them. But first, I want to give a quick shout out to the 5 pilots who answered, or provided the most answers, in no particular order. Dynamic Dolphin, better known as Bluegrass Dronography, RyVD, RyVD I assume, Chad SNS, Independent-Galliform, and Tuned. Thank you all. I got dozens upon dozens of responses. This is not a comprehensive listing of everyone who helped me, and to say the wider drone community, but I did want to give you guys a quick shout out. Thanks again. Let's start with... what drones do you use? You don't have to turn to Reddit anymore. I've got a bunch of other people that will tell you. So let's start with the summary. For professional capture work, DJI's Enterprise line, the Mavic 3, Enterprise, M300, M350 series, dominates for a good reason. Reliability, sensor quality, and the software ecosystem. The Mavic 3E is a particular sweet spot for a lot of folks. Doing mapping work, it's portable enough for efficiency. The batteries don't just die on you immediately, but it's capable enough for the professional deliverables. All that said, this hardware matters less than I think most people think. A disciplined pilot with a Mavic 3 will outperform a sloppy pilot with a more expensive M350. The drone is just the capture device. The drone pilot is what makes it valuable. I think about it like photography. A good camera helps, but a good photographer helps a whole lot more. That's all to say, for professional capture work, DJI's Enterprise line dominates for a good reason. They're reliable, the sensor quality's there, and the ecosystem's there. Likewise, DJI's consumer line dominates for a good reason. It's the only drones that currently fly via the Spexi app on the LayerDrone network, because they're so ubiquitous, because they're sub 250 grams, because we have an STGA in order to integrate them. All that said, let's see what the community specifically had to say. Independent-Galliform, when they first dipped their toes in, they just got a $50 toy drone, and they flew it in circuits in their backyard. When the 2019 drone rules were finalized, they got their basic certification, then they picked up the Phantom 3 standard. That's what got them hooked, but it was pretty inconvenient to travel with, and so the places they could fly was quite limited. They upgraded to the Mini 3 this year, and they like the improved portability, the cold weather operation, and the standard battery it fits, the micro RPA class. So you can move more freely in town. Extended battery life is going to come up a lot in these conversations. They feel really pleased with how much it costs and the value they got out of it. They want to get a thermal drone down the line, but the Mini 3 is keeping them flying often, and they're having fun. I'm Loki God, uses an M400 with various payloads for survey work, SNR, and public safety. And they also use an Helios 3 for interior inspections. Meanwhile, for Spexi and their own recreational use, the DJI Mini 3 Pro. Matthias actually shared 4 very interesting photos of drones they built, I would say, a meaningful amount of. He estimates about 40% of these. They also have a Nevada 2 and a Mini 3, and they're looking forward to getting a Matrice at some point. Check out the Discord if you haven't. These photos are great, but I realize in the art form that is podcasting, you might not be getting as much out of them as I am. RyVD is using the Mini 3 Pro to learn all about Spexi. And when they're doing first-person flying, they use a Meteor 7 with a 75mm. They find it's got easy freestyle and racing performance. They've got also a 65mm Hummingbird V3 that still needs to be set up, and they have a 4-inch motor they want to swap out. DBMVP, better known to me as Continuous Mongoose. By the way, if you're wondering what these weird names are, like Crepid Chicken, Continuous Mongoose, Clever Ape, when you use the Spexi app as a pilot, you get assigned a username randomly, and you might be picking up on how it works. Adjective, noun. Fun fact, there are a couple of chickens that are always competing as our top pilots. I will have to look this up, but it's interesting. Anyways, let's move on. Pashoals, DJI Mini 3, flying Spexigons, Tuned, Mini 4 Pro, got it for recreation, and they've managed to get a foot in the door with some drone ops using it. As you might suspect, the LayerDrone community, the DJI models, really do dominate. But you know what? It's not just the LayerDrone community. DJI maintains about 70 to 80% of the global civilian drone market. Some estimates put it at about 85% in the US and over 90% depending on the category you're using. But that is just to say, DJI is pretty ubiquitous. The drone's 2025 dataset found that DJI accounted for about 84% of all drone detections globally. DIY builds are just around 10%, a little less. This brings me to the next question. What's your favorite drone accessory? By and far, most common answer, batteries. You need batteries. You need a quality multi-charger for those batteries. Next most common thing, an SD card or a micro SD card, depending on your drone. Dynamic Dolphin, aka Bluegrass Dronography, suggests the portable power bank capable of at least 30 watts PD charging. He also really recommends okaytofly.com from AirData UAV for free 72-hour forecasts, and Flight Radar 24, the flight tracking app, to monitor potential airspace conflicts, mainly low-flying helicopters that can creep up fast in your zone. As Alec likes to say, you will probably hear a helicopter before you see it. So always keep those ears open when you're flying. RyVD actually had an original answer here, which was a hard shell case and strap to keep the props tucked in, which I do love. This is to say, other accessories that came up that I agree are quite interesting. A good landing pad and a polarizing filter can be genuinely underrated. Don't use a polarizing filter if you are flying for the LayerDrone network, though. What makes your data valuable is it's standardized. You can't be using a camera that produces different images than other cameras in this case. That said, a reliable weather app and a pre-flight checklist are going to beat all these recommendations. They should be standard as part of your kit. Think about it as, I was going to say, any outdoor recreational activity, but one where you have a flying robot. Do a little of your due diligence. That weather app and pre-flight checklist will do most of that for you. Another thing that came up, which I very much agree with, is a simple tablet sunshade for your controller. It's hard to fly what you can't see. But yeah, if nothing else, if you need to spend money, invest in extra batteries, a quality multi-charger, and some more memory cards wherever you can. All right, let's get to the fun stuff. What makes a good drone mission? To summarize, 3 things always came out. Clear intent, clean execution, usable output. Clear intent means knowing exactly what data you need before you start flying. You don't get if you're a professional at least, you don't get to just say, let's see what we get. Clean execution is the overlap of consistency, altitude, discipline, and understanding how your flight pattern affects the final deliverable. Less of a factor if you're using the Spexi app, where the drone flies itself at a standard height. Far more of a factor if you are flying it yourself. Usable output means your data solves someone's problem or is otherwise usable. The missions that feel best are the ones that do all 3 of this. And if you are working for a client, it's not something the client notices because it works. That's what makes this a craft for folks. In the Discord, we heard back, and location of jobs makes an awful lot of sense. It's also one of the prime considerations for the LayerDrone network. We're approaching 6 million acres, if we haven't already mapped, all across North America, but there are some incredibly remote or unique locations that need mapping, might even be demand-led mapping. But getting pilots out there in a way that makes economic sense for the network or them, that's a real question. We'll see what we come up with. Once again, Bluegrass Dronography, jumping in to make sure we all get their wisdom. Proximity is paramount to them. If there's a mission they can walk or bike to from their home or office, that's what they're doing. They also really like zones that are sparsely populated or open or more industrial or commercial. It's easier to fly, to keep a low profile. Purely residential areas, people can be pretty sensitive about you flying around, and I guess we're a pretty conflict-adverse group. RyVD suggests having access to a follow-along with a grid of multiple cross streets is great. You can walk up the middle and across as needed. Park or open area from start and end. Love it and completely agree. Speaking of drone missions, let's talk about how does other drone work compare to using the Spexi app on the LayerDrone network. So posed to the question, got a lot of DMs and I got a lot of replies. And what it comes down to is if you have ever freelanced, if you have ever been a contractor, if you have ever sold your craft, most drone work is project-based. A client hires you, you fly, you deliver, you invoice, you wait. often called the feast or famine cycle. Spexi missions on the LayerDrone network flip that model. Instead of chasing those individual contracts, pilots contribute to a continuous data network. Captures have value beyond a single client because they feed into a larger geospatial data set. That is to say, somebody captures data in, say, Calgary, Alberta. That data could be used by the city of Calgary, Alberta, and anyone else who wants to access that data as a customer. It can be used more than once. And then the economic relationship changes from contractor to network participant. You're building something cumulative rather than starting from zero with each job. It's kind of like the difference between driving for one person as a chauffeur versus being part of a transportation network where demand finds you, i.e. You're an Uber driver and your app dings and you know where to go. Hopefully a little bit more interesting than being an Uber driver, but that's just the flying part of it for me. One of the things that was brought up was that unlike other drone work, which often requires much more expensive higher-end platforms, being able to fly with a DJI Mini 2 or 3 is a significantly lower cost barrier for new pilots trying to get started. Also got that active Discord community, so people aren't alone when they run into challenges on this stuff. We've got product support and quick answers from your fellow pilots. That's a good answer. All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty. What was your most challenging drone flight? What we're finding, or what I'm finding, is that the ones that test you aren't when you crash your drone. It's where almost everything works, but something goes wrong. Your wind was just below your abort threshold. The light changed faster than you can capture. A site that looked simple on the map has elevation changes that wreck your output or your overlap calculations. In my experience, the hardest flights are the ones where real-time decisions about whether to push through or come back come up. Learning when good enough is not actually good enough. That's basically what it is. I've seen somebody, I might be talking about myself here, try to put their drone up in the air thinking that fog wasn't as low as it was, and then it went into the fog, and then they had to land it. But anyways, it was challenging, to say the least. It was a very slow, very blind landing attempt. Chad, SNS, brought up an extremely challenging zone in LA they had to fly. It turns out a mountain was blocking the cell phone on one end and the drone on the other end. They didn't have their Starlink with them, so what they did was they got their wife to go to one end of the street with the phone to get a cell signal. They then used a hotspot Wi-Fi connected to the phone on his controller tablet on the other end of the street so that he could keep connected to the drone and see the drone. That took 6 restarts to get one zone. For the record, one zone usually takes about 7 minutes. So Chad, thank you for your service. Sorry you had such a bad day. And Chad went on the record to say that was their only mission for the day. Understandable, Chad. Tuned Roll actually shared their experience with some of the recent flooding that happened near Vancouver, BC, over in Abbotsford. So if you don't know, Spexi issued some missions around that area because Highway number 1 in Canada, coming out of Vancouver, was flooded. A lot of farmland was flooded and the highway was effectively shut down. Fortunately, Spexi and LayerDrone pilots were able to map the area. But let me say what actually happened to Tuned Roll here. KPV and Tuned Roll were out there on the eastern side of the prairie. They were finishing up some zones, and then just sudden windstorm comes off the mountains. KPV had a near flyaway with their drone. Tuned Roll had to use his truck as a wind shelter to even get it off the ground. But Tuned Roll did, they're saying that whatever Spexi does to program these missions seems really robust. So the drone would get pushed off the mark while it's flying itself. He could manually take over, get it back, and resume, and it picked itself up quite well. Thank you for your service, Tuned Roll and KPV. Flight Lucians. One of their most stressful experiences was flying below the Brooklyn Bridge. They were doing a demonstration flight for an interview. Gusts of wind at nearly 30 miles per hour. They had cleared a landing area at the water's edge, but as soon as people, particularly children, saw the prop wash from the UAS, they came over to watch. And then they had the challenge of managing the wind while trying to get everyone to clear his landing area. It was a real wild experience, and they underlined how important it is to have a good safety crew when flying in NYC. Common face on these questions to answer? Good friend Bluegrass Dronography launched from a residential neighborhood recently, and their drone got immediately swarmed by, I'm going to look in the comments of this episode to see if you can guess it in advance. That's right, an angry hummingbird. There was a feeder at the house he was parked in front of. Male hummingbirds are extremely territorial. They had to abort their mission so as not to harm the little guy. Anyways, Bluegrass says, watch out for them hummingbirds. All right, next question. What's your best tip for flying a drone? What I found the answers here all came down to was flying the mission before you fly the mission. Walk the site mentally, check sun position, look at elevation data, know your takeoff and landing zones, have a backup, visualize the flight pattern, check the weather. The actual stick time is probably the easy part. Preparation is what separates pilots who deliver something of value versus pilots who deliver excuses. When I first got it started with drones over the past year or so, Graham from Spexi actually gave me the best advice I think I've ever gotten, which is you should always have your controller in your hand and your drone in sight. Marcus K says don't crash, keep a few spare micro SD cards in your drone bag because there's nothing worse than leaving them at home, and watch his Spexi tutorial, which he is promising to refresh in the spring, providing UK weather permits. We're going to hold you to that, Marcus, because I'm providing a link to that in the show notes. Bottletop says, don't fly what you can't afford to lose. Matthias says, is if you're not crashing, you're not learning. And then he apologizes. Independent-Galliform says, even if you don't take a course, do some reading and go write the exam, basic or advanced in Canada. Even if your flying doesn't require it, you will learn things that are handy to know. They also provide a Spexi-specific tip. Fly some RP missions before you request the initial 6 pay missions in your neighborhood. Unless you are absolutely sure no one else is flying for Spexi near you. With RP, you can reserve the paid ones so that no one gets to it before you do. If you don't know, first-time user on the Spexi app, or honestly someone who just hasn't requested these yet, you can get 6 paid missions provided by Spexi upon request near where you live to basically introduce you to the app and the network and how it works. And what Independent-Galliform is suggesting is that you accrue some RP before then, you fly some easy missions that are RP only. These are points the network awards you that you can use to reserve missions. Tuned says, the best tip I received when I started flying was to fly figure eights to develop stick control. Start with cinematic mode on the slowest speed limits in your backyard, then work up to sport mode in the park. For Spexi, oh, this is familiar, always keep a spare SD card. It's fundamental. Planning your missions is critical if you want to be effective with your time. Learn where your start and end points for different mission types are, and how to best sequence Spexigons for the most efficient battery use. Efficient battery use is going to be another common one too. JPS DFW says, whenever you fly an area, determine MOCA, minimum obstacle clearance altitude, especially before conducting autonomous missions, which, fun fact, are all Spexi missions. As long as you're above that, you're golden. And if you want to determine your MOCA, JPS has you covered. You can easily determine it by keeping camera gimbal straight on the horizon, and then look around to ensure there's nothing above it. Pretty simple. Good advice, JPS. Shane P says, while using your thumb, aka the thumb method, is intuitive for people who grew up playing video games, switching to a pinch grip using your thumb on top and your index finger on the side of the stick significantly changes the ergonomics and control of a drone. They also provide a rationale for why the so-called pinch method works better. It's muscular control. When you only use your thumb, you rely on a single pivot point. The index finger engages more fine motor muscles in your hand, allowing for those oh-so-tasteful microscopic adjustments. Resistance is also a bit better. The slight pressure between 2 fingers makes it easier to overcome the dead zone of the initial tension of the gimbal springs without overcorrecting, and consistency. It prevents your thumbs from slipping off the sticks during aggressive maneuvers or high stress situations. Also, fun fact, there was a time in my life about 15 years ago where I played video games semi-professionally, and I did use the pinch method for a game you might have heard of called Gears of War, for all these actual reasons. I can't believe I was somebody who held my controller like that, but I imagine it's just as true for drone operators. Shane P also says, use OEM batteries. Extremely good advice. I had an experience once with using non-OEM batteries, and to make a long story short, that experience taught me that we might save some money on a battery. If it bricks whatever you are putting it into, you did not save any money. Don't ask me why I know that. Ministerial Whippet says, best advice is simple. Get to know your drone controller well before doing any advanced maneuvers. Know the buttons so you can get your drone back safely if anything goes wrong. Double check for obstacles. And as is a common suggestion, go to an open area or park that is flight friendly. Get comfortable taking off landing. Go over your pre-flight settings. Set up your home point and play with your camera settings. After all that, it's just flight time that makes you better. Enjoy the journey. Good advice all around, y'all. On to the next question. Where do you like to fly your drone? Open agricultural land on a calm morning is hard to beat. You got those good sight lines, predictable conditions, but I'm also finding a lot of folks do find some satisfaction in complex urban environments. Not everyone. I would say it's maybe the minority of the community, but more than a few folks have said they like the challenge. That makes a good, clean capture more rewarding. My personal favorite flight to date has been in Vancouver near False Creek. I just think the seawall there is absolutely gorgeous, and it's where Graham coached me through my very first flight on the Spexi app. Tuned prefers the mountains heading out of the Fraser Valley. Gorgeous views up there. Shared a picture to prove it in beautiful BC. Can't argue with that. Tornado Billy Ehlers above the clouds in the mountains of Colorado. Another good answer. RyVD likes to keep it local. They try to take in the view before starting a Spexi mission. JPS prefers Port Aransas and Mustang Island. Dre C, anywhere and everywhere. Bluegrass Dronography, where don't I like to fly my drone? And D Crypto prefers flying around rural and open areas, coastlines and quiet outskirts, less interference, fewer restrictions, smoother flights, better visuals. Shane P says urban is good. You can almost always get good cellular reception, and as long as you have good line of sight, chaining your Spexigons from left to right has worked for me. That said, sometimes the RF soup in LA can be annoying. Yeah, I hear that. In rural areas, as long as they have good cell phone reception, they like to keep flying with as few distractions as possible. Complete agreement. All across the board, you guys. Thank you so much for your answers there. All right, let's bring it to the wow. What was your first wow moment while flying a mission? Uzi says, first day flying and working Spexi with a brand new drone. Good answer, but they have more than one. Last mission saw a new construction building and my drone crashed into a balcony. I said, oh wow, what a moment that was. Okay, Uzi, a little hot and cold. Appreciate it. Graham says, my first wow moment was in 2018 with a DJI Spark that a friend owned. Showed me how to connect a phone, take the drone off, and the way it hovered there so easily. Took a picture of us, held it in the palm of his hand, and that's when Graham knew that drones were going to become a really big thing. That said, they still think they have a very, very long way to go in terms of adoption. Independent-Galliform says, my first wow moment when flying for Spexi was realizing the big difference location makes. Tornado Billy Ehlers says, my first drone wow was when I got to hold the view from, when I first got to view the world from 400 feet in 1080 degrees, or in 1080p probably. That's too many degrees, man. Your drone's spinning out of control. They said their latest was just yesterday when they said, wow, that Spexi point was about 50 feet from a cell tower. They had to walk the perimeter to check it, but apparently still said wow. Sarah says, when I was flying in high winds and saw my drone being thrown around violently in the air, but still managed to do the mission. Tuned says, being asked by a farmer if his property was still safe after the floods, and being able to actually verify for him that everything was. Like these answers, RyVD, watching those first autonomous flights as the drone flew through its mapping missions. The Wade says, the day two sheriffs knocked on my car window when I was looking down at the controller with my drone mid-flight. Good wow moments all around, team. Here's the real question, everyone. How would you describe your drone work to a friend? Probably the most common answers along the lines of, I capture geospatial data that becomes 3D maps and models, construction, agriculture, insurance, infrastructure, think Google Earth, but higher resolution and current, at least if you're talking about the LayerDrone network. How I describe it right now is I tell flying cameras where to go. Now cars, cities, and infrastructure know where to go. Independent-Galliform, delight people by taking photos from angles they don't usually get to see. Yielding Gull, my god, that's a good username. I take high-resolution aerial photographs much more efficiently, cost-effectively than a traditional airplane. I love the idea of a traditional airplane, kind of, an Amish airplane. Tuned says, satellite imagery is expensive and not friendly to small projects. Drones can fly a single site or a whole city regardless of cloud cover and capture multiple angles and perspectives, not physically possible for a standard satellite. Now I'm wondering what a traditional satellite would be. This brings us to the future. How will drones change in 5 years? So, to summarize, I think the answer here is the biggest shift won't be the hardware. It'll be who's flying and why. We're moving from drones as tools. You operate as nodes in data networks. This is effectively the vision for the LayerDrone network. Think less, I fly my drone, and more, my drone flies for me and multiple clients. Remote ID and airspace integration are going to be maturing in the near future, meaning your drone will eventually, or could eventually operate semi-autonomously within certain approved corridors. For the record, your drone can fly autonomously using the Spexi app, but you understand what I mean here. We're also hoping to see battery tech push flight times past 60 minutes for the prosumer rigs, but I do think the real changes that's coming up is economic. Pilots transitioning from hourly contractors to participants in things like data marketplaces where their captures have compounding value. It's really a question of how a pilot positions themselves to see where that goes. In my opinion, though, we might be at like the smartphone inflection point from 2010, but for drones. I think data freshness will become a product category, kind of like global coverage, with drone data integrating with other autonomous systems. But that said, regulations. Big open question for any of these predictions. CNP Chris agrees with me. Regulations will become more strict and drive out most hobbyists or amateurs that have their Part 107 times as expensive, and the good ones will be 5-year-old DJIs. Bluegrass Dronography says that they think there will be an increase in use cases for drones in industries with more drones in the sky. I do think regulations are going to get even stricter, though. Chad SNS360 says an increase in regulation. My God, I'm sensing a trend, which will force out all consumer-grade drones. FPV drones will be mostly bootleg and smuggled black market. Blue or green list drones will begin to take over the market share in the US. DJI will either build a facility or manufacture in the US or pull out of the market entirely. I wonder what that would actually look like. I guess it would have to be a retroactive one to be meaningful. I digress, let's move on. The small drone-centric business will either go in another direction, expand into a more expensive drones, or simply fold and go out of business. In any case, drone work will become cost prohibitive in the USA. RyVD says more regulations. Hopefully simple solutions though. Batteries that last longer, more stable and easier to understand, more first-person view dronography, more autonomous flights and options. Good answers all around, everyone. So, just a quick review of what we went over on today's episode. We discussed how drones will change in 5 years, how to describe your drone work to a friend, the wow moments while flying a mission, where you like to fly your drone, what's your best tip for flying a drone, what's your most challenging drone flight, how does other drone work compare to Spexi and LayerDrone, and what makes a good drone mission, as well as what's your favorite drone accessory, and the number one question, what drones do you use or recommend? Once again, I want to thank the LayerDrone community for providing so many answers and so many valuable ones at that. There's a lot of experience, a lot of expertise, and it's an incredibly diverse set of people we've gotten there. I'd like to once again thank the 5 pilots who really made an effort to answer as many of these as they could with as much depth as they could. Bluegrass Dronography, RyVD, Chad SNS360, Independent-Galliform, Tuned, thank you again. And to anyone listening to this, thank you so much for taking the time. I hope you have a great day. Thanks for being a part of the Drone Network. Subscribe wherever fine podcasts are served to get a new episode every week. And remember to leave us a 5-star review on your podcast app of choice. It helps a lot. Today's show was sponsored by Spexi Geospatial and LayerDrone. Learn more about standardized drone imagery built for global scale at spexi.com, that's spexi.com, and layerdrone.org. Thanks again for listening.